Okay, well, I'm going to carry on from, well, it's 87b is where I left off last time, but I'll just go back a sec to 87a and the dialogue by CBs to just pick up the argument so that I remember what was being said. So CBs, I truly say that the Logos appears to me still at the same point and open to the same charge as we mentioned before. For on the one hand, I do not deny at all that it has been very elegantly and most sufficiently demonstrated that our soul also existed before she entered into her present form. So CB's is agreeing that the soul existed prior to current form. So that's what he's accepting. But on the other hand, if I may say without offending you, that it does not appear to also follow that our soul still exists somewhere after our death. So, soul exists after death. That's what Seabees is saying anyhow. Since on the one hand I do not agree with the objection of Simmias that the soul is neither stronger nor much more lasting than the body, right, so Simmias was saying, what was Simmias saying? That the soul is neither stronger, so soul less than body in strength and lasting. For she appears to me far more superior in all these respects. So he doesn't agree with Simmias. So yeah, he's not agreeing with that. Again, this is Seabees. Why then, the Logos or account or reasoning might say, are you still distrustful, seeing that after the human being dies, the weaker part still exists? Right, so he's saying the soul is stronger and lasts longer than the body. And so on death, you have a person that then dies, and that body still exists for a bit. And so if that body still exists for a bit and the soul is stronger, then why does he not believe that this exists, the soul? Does it not appear to you then that the more lasting part must necessarily still be preserved during that time? Who's this? Is this still CVs? Right. On this point, please consider the following, whether what I say makes sense. For just as Simmius, I will also need some image. To me, it seems like saying the following. Just as one would say the same thing after the death of an old weaver, that the human being has not perished but is preserved somewhere, then the garment which the human self had woven and was still wearing should be offered as a sign that the soul is preserved and has not perished. And if anyone should be distrustful of this same image, he would be asked whether the human genus is longer lasting than a garment which is in use and being worn. Then, if someone answers that the human genus lasts much longer, that then he must believe that then, he must believe that it has been proven that accordingly that which is indeed human is definitely even more preserved, since the less permanent thing had indeed not perished. But, O Simmias, I do not believe that it has to be the case, and you must also consider what I say. For anybody could assume that the man who said this was talking nonsense, for that the weaver had thus worn out many such garments and had woven those garments. Yet on the one hand he still perished later on after wearing many of them, but on the other hand prior to the last garment. Even if on this account a human being is not more inferior nor weaker than a garment, whereas I think the image must show the same relationship of the soul to the body, and anyone saying the same things about them would appear to me to be talking within measure, that on the one hand the soul lasts longer, while on the other hand the body is weaker and less permanent. For thus they might say that every soul wears out many bodies, especially if each soul lives many years. For if the body is in a state of flux and it should perish while the human was still alive, then since the soul is constantly weaving anew that which wears out, on the one hand it would be necessary that at the time when the soul does perish, herself would happen to be wearing the last garment or body, and only this would survive being destroyed. While on the other hand, at the time the soul is destroyed, the body already shows the weakness of its nature, by quickly decaying and disappearing. So that this, your logos or account, is in no way worthy of being confidently trusted, which says that when we die, our soul continues to exist somewhere. For if we were to come to an agreement with someone, saying that which you say and even more, who does not only allow that self exists for our soul in the time even before we are born, since when we die there is also nothing to hinder some souls to continue to exist and to be born, and thus be born and die again often. For in this way the nature of soul is so strong so as to be able to survive many births. Thus he allows these former concessions, whereas they no longer agree that herself does not suffer by her many births, so that herself is indeed finally altogether destroyed in a certain one of her deaths. But that this particular death and this particular dissolution of the body, which brings about the final destruction to the soul, no one can know, he might say, for it is impossible for us to perceive that at all. Then, if this happens to be the case, anyone feeling confident about facing death does not confide intelligently, unless he can prove that the soul is altogether deathless and indestructible. But if he cannot, and being about to die, he must necessarily be constantly in fear for his soul, that in this present separation from the body will be her complete destruction. Well, that's a long speech and very difficult to understand, so I think it needs unpacking. So I think this is Cebes. He agrees that the soul lasts longer and is stronger than the body. And then he brings in the analogy of a weaver and the garments. Weaver plus garments. And the analogy is supposed to explain what a soul plus body is. And so a weaver will wear some kind of garment. And over a lifetime, he will wear a garment that lasts this long, a garment that lasts this long, one that lasts this long, one that lasts this long, and one that lasts this long. And in this case here, even though garments are less than body in strength and duration, even though that's the case, this garment, the last garment, this garment here, this is the last garment. Last garment, because it's fairly new, will outlive, the last garment will outlive the weaver. And if it is, it's not, it implies it is not proof. It is not proof that garment lasts longer. I'm just going to use a greater than sign. Garment lasts longer than the weaver. Similarly, we have a soul that's going to wear a body. And the soul is going to last a long time. And during that time, there's going to be one body, another body, another body, another body. And this is going to be the last body. Body. Well, does that make sense? Well, maybe the body might die when the soul does. I don't know that the body would. It doesn't, because this implies there'd be a period here without a soul, which I don't think is what he's saying. But in any case, even though the bodies last less, each of them lasts less than the soul, it doesn't imply, this does not imply soul lasts forever. Even if it shows that soul lasts longer than body. I think that's the gist of what he's saying here, but let's just take a look at the words again. So So he agrees with Simmias. No, he does not agree with the objection of Simmias that the soul is neither stronger nor much more lasting than the body. Right, so he agrees that soul lasts for a long time. So the soul lasts for a long time. For she appears to me far more superior in all these respects. Why then, the reasoning, the account might say, are you still distrustful, seeing that after the human being dies, the weaker part still exists? Does it not appear to you then that the more lasting part must necessarily still be preserved during that time? Right, so it's basically saying if there's any part in time, this is death, and the body does last a little bit longer. So doesn't that show that the soul must still be around? It can't be less. Yeah, so basically when the person dies, the body is still present. That's this diagram here, isn't it? And so if the body still exists and the soul lasts longer than the body, then the answer to this must be yes. If soul greater than body and this body still exists, even after death, then the soul must still be there if the soul is greater than the body. But this is the argument that he's bringing, is that just because the body's still there, as in here, it doesn't mean that the soul has not left, because it could have been going over this long span but not lasting forever. Okay, so I don't need this diagram here. He needs an image. He brings the idea of the weaver, the garment being offered as a sign. For the weaver had worn out many such garments. This is this here. The image must show the same relationship of the soul to the body. So now we're looking at the soul and the body. This is the soul, and this is the body. And there's many bodies. There's a body, there's a body, there's a body, there's a body, there's a body for one soul. And after death, this body will last, but not with a soul. It doesn't mean that even though the soul lasts longer than body, because there's been multiple bodies, it could be that the soul does leave on this last body before this last body perishes. For thus they might say that every soul wears out many bodies, especially if each soul lives many years. For if the body is in a state of flux and it should perish while the human was still alive, then since the soul is constantly weaving anew that which wears out, on the one hand it would be necessary that at the time when the soul does perish, she would happen to be wearing the last garment or body, and only this would survive being destroyed, while on the other hand, at the time the soul is destroyed, the body already shows the weakness of its nature, by quickly decaying and disappearing. Yeah. So here, this is the body without a soul, and then last body quickly decays and disappears. Sound is no way worthy of being confidently trusted, which says that when we die, our soul continues to exist somewhere. Right. For if we were to come to an agreement with someone saying that which you say and even more, who does not only allow that self, what's that self? (88a), I think it's referring to the soul. (88a). For if one were to concede even more than you do to a man using that argument, if one were to grant him not only that the soul exists in the time before we are born, but that there is no reason why the soul of someone should not exist and continue to exist after our death, and thus frequently be born and die in turn. If one were to grant him that the soul's nature is so strong that it can survive many bodies, but if, having granted all this, one does not further agree that the soul is not damaged by its many births, and is not, in the end, altogether destroyed in one of those deaths, he might say that no one knows which death and dissolution of the body brings about the destruction of the soul, since not one of us can be aware of this. And in that case, any man who faces death with confidence is foolish, unless he can prove that the soul is altogether immortal. If he cannot, a man about to die must of necessity always fear for his soul, lest the present separation of the soul from the body bring about the complete destruction of the soul. When we heard, right, and then it goes on. Still not sure about this last bit, so what's been said? It's this 88a. For if one were to concede even more than you do to a man using that argument, if one were to grant him not only that the soul exists in the time before we are born, but that there is no reason why the soul of some should not exist and continue to exist after her death, and thus frequently be born and die in turn. Born and die in turn. Right, so he's saying it will exist after some bodies. If one were to grant him that the soul's nature is so strong that it can survive many bodies, but if, having granted all this, one does not further agree that the soul is not damaged by its many births, and is not in the end altogether destroyed in one of those deaths, he might say that no one knows which death and dissolution of the body brings about the destruction of the soul. Right, so you're granting that the soul existed before a birth, this is a body, and if you take this body here that lasts this long, then you're granting not only that the soul exists beforehand, but it also exists afterwards. But then another body is used, and another one, and another one. But I think it says that the births could where are we? That the births So it's the way it's the nature of the soul is so strong so as to be able to survive many births, and he allows these concessions, but does not allow that the soul does not suffer by her many births, so that the soul is indeed finally altogether destroyed in a certain one of her deaths. But that this particular, pardon me, but that this particular death and this particular dissolution of the body, which brings about the final destruction to the soul, no one can know, he might say, for it is impossible for us to perceive that at all. Yeah, and so you don't know which body it's going to be, which the soul's going to basically run out finally. Because even though it lasted this long time, this whole period here, you don't know which body the soul will perish on its death. So you can't be confident that the soul will last forever, according to Cebes in this passage. And unless he can prove that the soul is altogether deathless and indestructible. Right, so then Phaedo, 88c. Then, upon hearing what they had said, we were all thoroughly in an unsettled state, as we told each other afterwards. For having been quite convinced by the previous argument, they seemed to confuse us again, and to throw us into distrust of not only what had already been said, but also of what was going to be said later on, that either we were quite worthless as judges, or that the subject matter was unworthy of trust. Echecrates. By the gods, O Phaedo, you have my sympathy indeed. I've forgotten who Echecrates is. So now we've got a little interlude where we have Phaedo describing the interventions of Cebes and Simmias. Interventions leading to dismay of the group. And then Echecrates comes in. I think this is one of the characters. So Phaedo's recounting the whole story of the day of Socrates' death. Echecrates might be the person he's recounting it to. Let me just take a quick look to see if that's the case. Yes, so Echecrates, were you with Socrates yourself, Phaedo, on the day when he drank the poison in prison? So he wanted to know the story from Phaedo. Right, yeah. So he's the original person talking to Phaedo. Yeah, so he's the person wanted to know the story of Socrates' last day. By the gods, O Phaedo, you have my sympathy indeed, for as I listen to you now, I also find myself saying such a thing to myself. What account, then, can we still trust? Since the account which Socrates produced was extremely convincing, but has now fallen into distrust, since the account that the soul is a harmony inherent in us has now and always had a hold of me in a wonderful way. And just as you mentioned it, it reminded me that I had myself previously taken this for granted also. And again, I am in much need of some other account. Right, the soul is a harmony inherited. So his position was soul is a harmony inherent in us. And I think the argument against that was that when you break a guitar, it was able to play, the guitar is able to play, the guitar is able to play harmony whilst it's alive as such. But if somebody were to break it, then the harmony would also break. I think that was what the argument was, why this might not last. And again, I am in much need of some other account, just as if from the beginning, which will convince me that the soul does not die along with the body. Tell me then, by Zeus, in what way did Socrates pursue this account? And whether that man was distressed, just as you say you had obviously become distressed, or was he not, but quietly came to the rescue of the account, or the Logos? And if you rescued it sufficiently or deficiently, tell us everything as most precisely as you can. Phaedo. I have certainly often been in awe of Socrates, O Echecrates, but never more than at that time that he came to our rescue. Therefore, on the one hand, he had a response to those objections that was equally not at all expected. But what most mystified me about him was this. First, on the one hand, was the pleasant and gentle and admirable way in which he received the objections of the young men. Well, that's nice to hear. 89. So Socrates receives the objections. I think this is important because quite often in arguments, people react in very different ways. But he did it in a pleasant, gentle, and admirable way. Objections of Simmias and Cebes. So here we go. First, on the one hand, was the pleasant and gentle and admirable way in which he received the objections of the young men, and how keenly he perceived the effect which their words had then effected upon us, and that consequently how well he healed us. Right, so there's Simmias, Cebes, and then there's the rest of the group. However many there were, about 14 of them. And then there's Socrates. So he could see these people talked, gave their account. This is the objection. But this objection also had an effect on the rest of the group, and he was able to perceive this effect. And, as it were, summoned us from our flight and defeat, and turned us around in order to follow along with him, and together examine their objections. Echecrates. How did he do this then? Phaedo. I will tell you, for I happened to be sitting to his right, by the couch, upon a low seat, so that he was sitting much more higher than me. He was then rubbing my head, and bringing together the hair on the back of my head, for he so happened to be in the habit of playing with my hair. Socrates. Tomorrow then, O Phaedo, you will probably cut this beautiful long hair. Phaedo. That is likely, O Socrates. Please do not, should you be convinced by me. What should I do then? Today I shall cut mine and you yours, if perchance the Logos indeed dies for us, and we are unable to revive it. And it seems to me at least that if I were you, and should the Logos escape us, I would take an oath, just as the Argives do, not to let my hair grow, before I took up arms again, and until I should vanquish this argument of Simmias and Cebes. Right, so... Okay, so you got Socrates on some couch, and here you've got Phaedo with his long hair. Phaedo and Socrates. So he's playing with his hair as he talks to him, but I think there must be a thing that after death, in mourning, you would cut your hair. But instead, Socrates proposes that Phaedo and Socrates will cut their hair if Logos indeed dies for us, and we're no. If Logos dies, and by Logos, I like to think of it as either like reasoning or giving an account. And that's because these arguments here, these objections by Simmias and Cebes, now need to be countered. And he then suggests that he should take an oath not to let his hair grow unless he should vanquish. So Phaedo to keep hair short until defeat of Simmias and Cebes' argument. Objections. This is Okay. Phaedo, but they say that not even Heracles was able to fight against two. Then call on me as your Iolaus, Iolaon, as long as there is still light. Phos. I shall call on you, but accordingly, not as Heracles, but as Iolaus. It makes no discernible difference. But first, we should take care to guard against a certain mental condition, pathos, and that we should not be affected by it, pathomen. What condition is that? That we should not become haters of words, just as people become haters of humans. For there is no greater defect that one can suffer than to hate any logos. So we got Socrates. That's 89D. Do not hate words. There is no greater defect that one can suffer, pardon me, that one can suffer, the greatest defect to hate any logos. But hatred of words and hatred of humans arise out of the same conditions. So hatred of words, hatred of humans. For hatred of humans is either put on out of excessive trust in someone without the use of art, teknes, and by being led to believe that the man is altogether truthful and sound and trustworthy, then a short time afterwards discovered this person is base and untrustworthy. Right, so this is hatred of humans, trusting them as good, discover as bad. And then after this experience, another one also happens. And when one has this feeling many times, okay, and this repeats itself, and especially with those whom he was led to believe should be their nearest and dearest friends. So these are trusting as good as nearest and dearest friends. Then in the end, after many such blows, he hates everyone. Repetition leads to hating everyone. And is led to believe that perfect wholesomeness, soundness, and sanity does not exist in anyone. Or have you not perceived this happening? That's so true. That's great. 89D. Hatred of humans, 89D. Right, so how does that relate to hatred of words? Or have you not perceived this happening? Phaedo, many times indeed. Is it not the case then that this is a disgraceful mental condition? Right, hating everyone. So this is disgraceful mental condition. And clearly due to an attempt to have human relations without making use of such an art in human affairs, right? So there is an art of human affairs. Art of human affairs. Technis peri tanthropea. Technis peri tanthropea. For if he had made use of an art to any degree, it would have led him to believe, just as it has to be in this way, that on the one hand, the very useful and the very worthless are both very rare. Right, so humans. We have very useful and very worthless. And both of these are rare. And on the other hand, the majority are between these two extremes. So majority lie between. What do you mean? Said Phaedo. Socrates, it is just as with the very short and the very tall. Do you think anything is more rare than it is to find either an extremely tall or an extremely short man, or a dog, or anything else? Or again, one extremely swift or slow, or deformed or well formed, or white or black? Or do you not perceive that in all those cases, on the one hand, the most extreme at either end are rare and few, but on the other hand, the abundant and plentiful are in between those? Right, I think he's just describing the distribution of people being, is that the normal distribution? I can't remember. But like the majority of people, whether this is height, height, or intelligence, the extremes here, low, extreme, rare. Then you have the high, extreme, which is also rare. And then you have vast majority. In between. Right, so most certainly indeed, said Phaedo. Socrates, do you think that it is not the case then that if a contest of worthlessness were established, there also the winners would be very few? That is indeed likely, because it is reasonable. But words, on the one hand, are not like human beings in this aspect, since now I was merely following your lead. But that condition happens whenever anyone puts their trust in some words as being true, without the use of the art of the logos. So I think he's saying here we had trusting as good. So here we have hatred of words as trusting as true. And then discover it's false. Discover as false. Anyone puts their trust in some words as being true without the use of the art of the logos. So instead of the art of human affairs, here you've got the art of the logos. Technes peritos logos. Technes peritos logos. Something like that. Then shortly afterwards believes the word to be false. Thus, on the one hand, by being at times, where at other times by not being, and so on with another and another case. Well, that doesn't make sense. 90C. Likely indeed, he said, but arguments, or words, are not like men in this particular. I was merely following your lead just now. The similarity lies rather in this. It is when one who lacks skill in arguments puts his trust in an argument as being true, then shortly afterwards believes it to be false, as sometimes it is, and sometimes it is not. And so with another argument and then another. You know how those in particular who spend their time studying. Right, so sometimes it is false and sometimes it isn't false. They believe it to be false. And because it's saying words, do not hate words. So where is it that he says do not hate words? Hater of words. Me genometha miso logoi. So it's words is logos. So it could be arguments. So it could be arguments, as it is in the other translation, or reasoning. But arguments or words, on the other hand, are not like human beings, etc. Whenever anyone puts their trust in some arguments as being true without the use of the art of the logos, then shortly after believe the argument to be false, as it is in some occasions, where at other times it's not. So discover it's false, although sometimes tick it is false, or it is not false. I think he's describing what just happened, because this group of people saw the objections of Simmias, and so they believed Socrates' argument as being false, because they then believed this argument as being true. But they may find it to be false, or they might have found Socrates' argument to be false, when in fact it is not. So it's just a changing of opinion without the art of the logos to be able to discern the difference. And so on with another and another case. And even more so, with those who spend their time at contradicting the logos. That in the end they believe they have become most wise, and that they alone have thoroughly understood that there neither exists any soundness nor any stability among the realities, nor in any words. So he has a quick bite at those who, believe or study? Spend time in contradictions, and they result in, they think they become most wise, and that they alone have thoroughly understood that there near exists no soundness, no stability. In what? Among the realities. No soundness among realities or words. But that all that exists without any rules of art, just as if it were in the tide of the Euripo Straits, churning up and down and in no way resting for any time at all. So no rules of art. Phaedo, what you say is entirely true, truly so. Socrates, is it not the case, O Phaedo, that it would be a sad state of affairs if there were really a certain logos that is true and firm and capable of being understood? Right, so now we're going on to the true logos. So what's this? Argument or account, reasoning, So the true Logos, where are we? About 90D, just before 90D. And it is true, firm, and capable of being understood. True, firm, capable of being understood. But that through their experience of having dealt with such words that on the one hand at one time were believed to be true, but on the other hand at another time untrue, but they did not in any way blame themselves nor their own lack of art, but in the end, because of the suffering, gladly shift the blame away from themselves to the words. So argument, say there's an argument, and it shifts from being true, false, true, false, and then that the person who is observing that with an eye or the mind's eye, then blames this, the argument, not lack of art. And from that time on, spend the rest of their life hating and reviling, blames, hates, reviles. And I guess this is one argument, but it could apply to arguments in general. Not own lack of art. And thus being deprived of the truth of beings, onton, and of knowledge, epistemes. Oh, that's the end of that sentence. Thus being deprived of the truth of beings and of knowledge. So this deprives, if you blame that through a lack of art, will result in deprived of the truth of being, truth or reality, of existence, or being, and of knowledge. Yes, by Zeus, says Phaedo, without a doubt, that condition would be a pitiful state of affairs. Socrates, accordingly then, this condition, on the one hand, is the first thing that we should guard against, and that we should not allow into our soul, that dangerous conviction that words have nothing sound in them. So this is dangerous conviction. Words have nothing sound in them. Dangerous conviction. This is at 90E. But much rather that it is us who are in no way maintained in a sound way, and that we must bravely and eagerly pursue the condition of being maintained in a sound way. Thus, on the one hand, for you and the others, for the sake of all the life still to come, and I, on the other hand, for the sake of my death. Is it mine? Of death itself? I don't know. In the present condition, run the risk of not maintaining a philosophical attitude about this, but just as those who are quite unenlightened have a contentious attitude. Right, so being maintained in a sound way. Ugios, exane, ugios. What's ugios mean? Ugies, ugion. Ugies. Healthy, sane, sound, well. Long life. Is that how it was? Ugios, yes. Ugios. Healthy, sane, pi, hugi, long life. Long life. Or good life. Sound, healthy, hearty, strong. To live. Gay. Gay. Gway. Words such as vital. Okay, in any case, that's what it means. Being maintained in a sound way. So, for the sake of life to come and for the sake of death, run the risk of not maintaining a philosophical attitude, and that the unenlightened, is it unenlightened or unenlightened? Unenlightened have a contentious attitude. For the unenlightened, when they also engage in argument about anything, on the one hand, will in no way care whether or not the logos under discussion maintains any mindfulness. So they do not care mindfulness of argument. But on the other hand, they are only eager that those present believe this which they have set forth. So they do care others present believe them. Believe their, I don't know, account. And it seems to me that in my present condition I differ from them only to this extent, for I shall not in any way be eager for those present to believe that what I say is true, except if it were secondary. But I shall only be eager that myself thoroughly believes that anything I say has to be in this way. For behold, in what a selfish way I reason, O my dear companion. For if, on the one hand, what I say hits upon being true, surely then it has to persuade in a beautiful way. But if, on the other hand, nothing exists after death, well then indeed for this time even less shall I be inclined to distress those present with lamentations before death. What the hell does that mean? Right, I get that he doesn't need the group to believe, so okay, this is Socrates. Doesn't need group to believe him. What else? I shall only be eager that myself thoroughly believes that anything I say has to be in this way. For behold, in what a selfish way I reason, my dear companion. For if on the one hand what I say hits upon being true, surely it has to persuade in a beautiful way. But if on the other hand nothing exists after their death, then, well then indeed for this time even less shall I be inclined to distress those present with lamentations before death. Right, I think I need another one. 91b, another translation. 91b. Right, I differ from them, the people who want the group to believe them. I differ from them only to this extent. I shall not be eager to get the agreement of those present that what I say is true, except incidentally. but I shall be very eager that I should myself be thoroughly convinced that things are so. So, doesn't need group to believe him, but eager to convince himself to be convinced himself. Right? For I am thinking, seeing how contentious the spirit, that if what I say is true, it is a fine thing to be convinced. True, a fine thing to be convinced of. That if what I say is true, it is a fine thing to be convinced. If, on the other hand, nothing exists after death, at least for this time before I die, I shall distress those present less with lamentations, and my folly will not continue to exist along with me. That would be a bad thing, but will come to an end in a short time. Oh, right, okay. So he says that the soul, right, he had an argument that the soul, that Socrates believes will believe life carries on after death. And he makes the point that it's a good position to hold. I should be very eager that I should myself be thoroughly convinced that things are so. For I am thinking, seeing how contentious the spirit, that if what I say is true, it is a fine thing to be convinced. So, if it's true that life carries on after death, so if it's true, it's a fine thing to be convinced. And if, on the other hand, nothing exists after death, so if it's false, he will spare the group any lamentations due to dying. And in any case, the false belief will die with him. So it's a bad thing to hold it, but it will be the false belief come to an end in a short time. False belief, which is bad, but short-lived. If it's false. I get that. Right. For if on the one hand what I say hits upon being true, surely then it has to persuade in a beautiful way. For if on the other hand nothing exists after death, then, well, then indeed for this time even less shall I be inclined to distress those present with lamentations before death. Since neither will my ignorance continue to exist along with me, for that would be wrong, since it will come to an end a little later, just like the worn-out garment. I don't know that it says that, but in any case. Here I am, thus prepared, O Simmias and Cebes. I come to advocate for the Logos. So then, if you will be persuaded by me, you will give but little thought to the person of Socrates, but much more to the truth. So 91c prepares, so Socrates prepares response to Simmias and Cebes. And he says, if you will be persuaded me, you will give. So, if persuaded, it will be due not Socrates, but the truth. If on the one hand you believe that what I say is true, agree with me. But if on the other hand you do not, oppose it with every logos, in order that my eagerness, in order that in my eagerness I do not thoroughly beguile myself and you at the same time, and, just like a bee, leave behind my sting when I go. Then we must go on. First, if I do not appear to remember, remind me of what you said. Okay, so first, reminder of what was said. For Simmias, on the one hand, as I believe, distrusts and fears that even though the soul is more divine and beautiful than the body, she may yet perish by being of such a nature as you see in harmony. So Simmias, harmony. Whereas Cebes, I think, agrees with me in this, that on the one hand, the soul is much more longer lasting than the body. So Cebes, soul is longer lasting than the body. But on the other hand, that this is altogether unknown, whether or not the soul often really wears out many bodies, and then, upon leaving her last body, at that time she is destroyed. Soul is greater body, but destroyed after last body. And that was that diagram here, where these are the bodies. And the blue is the soul, the white is the bodies. Destroyed after last body. And this is her own death, the total destruction of soul, since the body is always being destroyed, for its destruction does not ever end. Is it these issues, or others then, O Simmias and Cebes, which we must necessarily investigate? Phaedo, they both agreed that it really was these. Socrates, do you then not accept all our previous statements, or some, but not others? Phaedo, some, they both said, but not others. Socrates, what then about the Logos in which we said that learning is recollection, and that if this Logos has to be in this way, our soul must necessarily previously exist elsewhere before being imprisoned in the body? Cebes, on the one hand, I was at that time wonderfully convinced by it, and now again I stand by it, as I would by no other Logos. So this was about learning recollection. So learning as recollection, which implies learning as a recollection implies soul exists previously elsewhere. Soul exists elsewhere before this body. And so Cebes is saying yes. Cebes is agreeing. All right. Simmias, and I certainly have to believe it in this way also. And Simmias. Tick. So they both believe that. And I would be very surprised if I indeed ever believed about this in any other way. Socrates, but you must necessarily change your opinion, O Theban guest, if you still maintain the belief that on the one hand, harmony is a composite thing, while on the other hand, you say that soul is a kind of harmony composed out of physical elements being in a state of tension. Right, so harmony is a composite thing. So, okay, this is Socrates versus Simmias. Versus is probably not the right way of putting it. Okay, let's be nicer here. It's not a battle. Socrates, I don't know, two Simmias. So harmony is a composite thing. Harmony is a composite thing. Soul is a kind of harmony composed out of physical elements being in a state of tension. So, soul is a kind of harmony composed out of physical elements composed out of physical elements and being in a state of tension. Right. For certainly you will indeed not allow yourself to maintain that prior to a composite harmony existed, those elements existed even before that, out of which it must have necessarily been composed, or would you allow this? What does that mean? Certainly, because he's saying soul exists elsewhere before the body. Harmony is a composite thing, and soul is a kind of harmony composed out of physical elements being in a state of tension. Where's this bit? 92b. 92b. If you still believe that the harmony is a composite thing and that the soul is a kind of harmony of the elements of the body in a state of tension, so body, soma, let's say soma, somaton, yeah, I think soma is body rather than physical elements. Soul is the harmony of the elements of the body in a state of tension, for surely you will not allow yourself to maintain that a composite harmony existed before those elements from which it had to be composed, or would you? Right. So the soul is a, how can he show a harmony? I don't know, something like this. A nice harmony. We can have this here, this here, so let's say the soul is this harmony of body elements. It is soul as harmony in body. in body. But the soul, but this is life, and before life, what is the soul? Because it does exist. Soul exists, but how? I think that's the question. Because it says here, 92b, you must change your mind, my Theban friend, said Socrates, if you still believe that a harmony is a composite thing, and that the soul is a kind of harmony of the elements of the body in a state of tension. For surely you will not allow yourself to maintain that a composite harmony existed before those elements from which it had to be composed, or would you? Yeah, these elements are body elements, and therefore they can't exist here. For example, this cannot exist here because it's a body part, and the body has come to life here. Similarly, this can't exist, or this, or this. They are body parts, so they cannot exist here. Elements of body. I think that's what that means. Not in any way, O Socrates, said Simmias. Socrates, do you realize then that this is what you are in fact saying when you state that, on the one hand, the soul indeed exists even before she takes on the form of the human body? So it exists, but how? This is before. Before life is before taking on form of human body, but the soul, but the harmony is, I see the problem. So the harmony depends on the human body, and the soul is the harmony. So the harmony of body, but body cannot. Soul is the harmony of the body. Harmony of body, but body cannot exist before life. Therefore, soul cannot exist before life. So it's a contradiction, implies contradiction. Right, the soul indeed. Let's do this bit again. Socrates, do you realize then that this is what you are in fact saying when you state that, on the one hand, the soul indeed exists even before she takes on the form of the human body, whereas at that time she is composed of elemental beings which do not exist at all? Exactly. These beings, they do not exist at all. Do not exist before life. For harmony is certainly indeed not such as that to which you compare her, since the lyre and the strings and the sounds that are produced before must still remain unharmonized, whereas the harmony that is composed last of all is also the first to be destroyed. In what way then will you accord this logos with that one? Well, I didn't get that last bit. For harmony is certainly indeed not such as that to which you compare her, since the lyre and the strings and the sounds that are produced before must still remain unharmonized, whereas the harmony that is composed last of all is also the first to be destroyed. Just before 92C. A harmony is not like that to which you compare it. The lyre and the strings and the notes, though still unharmonized, exist. The harmony is composed last of all and is the first to be destroyed. And then there's a pun. How will you harmonize this statement with your former one? I don't know why he says, okay, so the harmony is composed last of all. Yes, as in you need the lyre first, you need the strings second, and then you need the notes. Then you will get a harmony. Which means the harmony is composed last of all. Yes. But why does it say, and is the first to be destroyed? Why is the harmony the first to be destroyed? The first to be destroyed. Well, it won't last without any of the others. If you take away the notes, there won't be a harmony. If you take away the strings, there won't be a harmony. If you take away the lyre, there won't be a harmony. So it's definitely not the last thing to stay. I don't know that makes it the first thing to go. So what's he saying? So the lyre, you have the lyre, something like that. Then you have the lyre plus the strings. So here you have lyre, lyre, and strings. Then you have the lyre, strings plus notes. Which then results in harmony. So this is lyre, strings, and notes. So it's the last to be. Last to be composed. Last to be composed. And likewise, if you take away how do I represent this? If you take away the notes, the harmony goes. If you take away the lyre, the harmony notes. You take, alright, remove implies no harmony. If you remove the strings, remove lyre here, remove strings, and here remove notes. So no harmony, which does it can't outlive the others. And does maybe the first to go? I mean, that's what the text says. I'm not seeing it yet, but that's what it's saying. So, back to the text. The soul indeed exists before she takes on the form of the human body, whereas at that time she is composed of elemental beings which do not exist at all. For harmony is certainly indeed not such as that to which you compare her, since the lyre and the strings and the sounds that are produced before must still remain unharmonized. Right. Whereas the harmony that is composed last of all is also the first to be destroyed. As in, you remove any of these and it all go. In what way will you harmonize this reasoning with that one? Sumasete, xumasetai. Anyway, not in any way, said Simmias. Socrates, and surely the logos about harmony should conspicuously possess concord. Xunodo. Check this one out. Common. Scrape. Scratch. I don't think it's that. No. So what is this harmony word? Sunod. This one? No, we did that one. Well, I'm not sure. Not sure. Okay. And surely the logos about harmony, harmonious, should conspicuously possess concord, xenodo. If indeed any other does, it must in a conspicuous way, said Simmias. So then, your logos is not concordant. Look then, which one of the logoses do you prefer? That learning is recollection, or that the soul is harmony? I much rather prefer the former, O Socrates, for on the one hand, the latter one came to me without demonstration, but with a certain probability and attractiveness, which is why most men believe it. That's quite good. So, our belief in argument from certain probability and attractiveness, which is why most men believe it. But on the other hand, I am aware the logos upon which the proof is based on probability are falsely pretentious, and if one does not guard against them, they will most certainly thoroughly deceive one, even in geometry and in everything else. Whereas the logos of recollection and learning is delivered by a hypothesis worthy of acceptance. For in this way our soul was also said to exist somewhere before she came into the body, just as her ousia, self-existence, is of the kind that we qualify by the name of that which is. Self-essence is of the kind that we qualify by the name of that which is. Eponymian Tau Olistin 92e. The theory of recollection and learning, however, was based on an assumption worthy of acceptance, for our soul was said to exist also before it came into the body, just as the reality does, that is of the kind that we qualify by the words what it is. And I convinced myself that I was quite correct to accept it. Therefore, I cannot accept the theory that the soul is a harmony, either from myself or anyone else. Thus, as I persuade myself, I accept this logos in a sufficient and correct way. Necessarily, then, by these reasons, as it is proper, neither can I accept the theory from myself nor anyone else that soul is harmony. What then about the following one, O Simmias? Does it seem proper to you that harmony, or any other composite, should somehow be maintained in a different way than those elements should be maintained out of which she must be composed? Right, so if your harmony, if this is your harmony again, with your different colors, so this is harmony. How do you maintain that? Maintain this, well, is equivalent to maintaining this, 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 and this. So it's the same as maintaining the parts or maintaining the whole, because it is a composite. Go back to that. What about the following one, Simis? Does it seem proper to you that harmony or any other composite should somehow be maintained in a different way than those elements should be maintained out of which she must be composed? In no way whatsoever. You maintain the parts, you will maintain the whole. I think that's what it means. Neither, as it appears to me at least, can she truly act on anything, nor be acted upon by anything in a different way than than that which those parts would either act or be acted upon. So also act or acted upon. In other words, if you move the parts to the left, you're moving the harmony to the left. If you disintegrate, if you separate the parts, you separate the harmony. Or dissolve the parts, you dissolve the harmony. Whatever you do to the parts will affect the harmony which is made up of those parts. Yeah. Well, 93A, I think I'll pick it up from there next time.